Hey everyone, this is Dr. Sam Shea of the WorkOnlineCourse.com. I'm interviewing today Bryan Wagner, one of my favorite certified facilitators for the work of Byron Katie. Bryan Wagner, if you've seen him, haven't seen his other videos interview on the Work Online course, please do. Bryan is a acupuncturist, a long-term. He's been in the he's had a he's listen to the interview. He's had an interesting life, and he's is your acupuncture acustl.com, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so acupuncture St. Louis is the shorthand. I mean that's what the shorthand acustl.com. But it's also the work with Bryan, Bryan. The work with Bryan, Bryan. This is how you saw his name, Bryan. All one word, no dashes or dots or anything. Just theworkwithbryan.com. And today we're going to cover turnarounds. Now, turnarounds are the what follows the four questions of the work of Byron Katie, and turnarounds are interesting. My experience with the turnarounds has been quite a journey, where I struggled with them in the beginning a lot, to the point where I made a turnaround trainer, where I took the 64 universal beliefs that on Katie's sheet, and then made a worksheet to give me some practice, and then ultimately to share it with everyone else. And in this interview, I want to talk to Bryan about, I'll ask him about his experience with the turnarounds in more detail, specifically how to do them, uh, how to find them, particularly if they're difficult, and also how to find the examples of the turnarounds when they weren't literally true, like when turnarounds become a real mind, mind twist, or they seem like they're impossible, or there's no possible way of there could be any example of that, things like that. So yeah, so Bryan, tell us what your experience was with the turnarounds when you first experienced them.
Well, hi, Sam.
Hi.
uh, with turnarounds, I find that was the hardest part for me to get. Uh, and initially, a lot of it was just the mechanical side of it. Like, how do you turn the sentence around? And your trainer, turnaround trainer, is a great tool for getting people through that hump.
Thank you.
For me, also finding turnarounds that aren't uh, literal or that can't be taken literally. For instance, I work with a lot of people, and if they're new to the work, say if the statement is, he shouldn't have hit me, turn around, I shouldn't have hit him. Well, usually with people new to the work, they go, but I didn't hit them. So how do I work with that?
Yeah, that's
How
actually
do,
was my experience. I mean, I
yeah,
was I was hit in school, and I've done the work of, like, he shouldn't have attacked me, but we can exchange the word hit just as easily. It was his fist ricocheting off my face, not the other way around. So how as someone, going back, how can I reconcile that in my head? I shouldn't have
yeah.
hit him. So help us with that.
So for me, what I find is I look to go, well, how do I hit them? And my way of hitting may be different. I may not use my fists, but I may use my attitude. I may use my words. I may use um,
The look.
my mental force or the look.
Yeah.
Or like for me, it's like a mental, like I am going to kill you with my mind, like when I'm really pissed off.
Mhm.
So that's how I hit. Um, and people may say, yeah, but that's not fair. They hurt. I'm just doing it figuratively. And all I can say to that is when I hit someone non physically, that hurts me. And I mean it to hurt them in that moment I'm doing it. So that's what I'm working with. So I think some people find it hard to find those kind of turnarounds in themselves. And, or like people or so and so shouldn't lie to me and turn around, I shouldn't lie to them. Well, I never did lie to them. How do I work with that? It's like, well, how do I lie to them in a subtler way?
Mhm.
Um, So that's another area where it's like, where do you find the turnarounds? And for me, the best way to do that is just to get very still. And what I do is just close my mind or close my eyes and ask me, how am I hitting this person in whatever way I'm doing it? And I close my eyes and wait for an answer. And usually there's answers come up, and sometimes I have to wait a while because I'm pushing them down on some
Mm-hmm.
level. Uh, but the answer usually comes up, and it's usually very clear and oftentimes surprising. It's like, oh, that's how I'm hitting that person in that situation. Um, I'm doing it by doing this, or whatever it is. Because even oftentimes for me, I'm such a people pleaser by nature or design or whatever. So when I'm turning around like more negative statements like hitting or lying or hating someone, it's like, well, I don't do that. It's like, well, how am I doing it in that moment?
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, my way of hitting can be very different. My way of lying could be very different. Um, my way of attacking someone could look very nice. Um, and that's what I've noticed.
Can you give examples of that? I kind of have an image of like someone being like syrupy nice or passive aggressive. Like that's what I see. You know, when I think of
Well,
someone
that's
being nice but mean, I think of my grandma who was very passive aggressive and at certain points in her life.
yeah, and then that's certainly one way.
Yeah.
For me, I was thinking of particular situations where I'm nice and I really thought I was doing the just thing. I wasn't just showing niceness. I really thought I was being nice. Um, and it involved a family member where I I was trying to mend the relationship and I thought I was being very nice and trying to build bridges and all that. And I realized underneath all my efforts was this belief of I'm right, you're wrong, and I want you to know that. And once I discovered that, I got to see the falseness of my niceness. I thought I was sincere. If you would have asked me that, I would have said, no, I'm 100% sincere. I really want to heal this relationship. And I did, but underneath it, I really wanted to show that I was right and they were wrong. So it's
I mean,
just a mixed motive. I don't know if that's clear. It's
I
like I
think
was sincere, but at the same time, there was another thing going on.
I think you since my interpretation, what you said, and reflecting on my experience of something similar is like I yes, I want to heal the relationship, meaning I want to heal the stress between us, and the way what that looks like to me is making to way to heal that stress is to make sure that you know that you were wrong and that I know that I'm right, and you're okay with that. That's
Yeah,
you're okay with being
about some
wrong, and
sense. Yeah,
yeah.
and it was so subtle. Or at least I thought so. From my side, it was really subtle. I'm sure this person saw it really clearly.
I think I'm
um,
reminded of my friend Barry, who he kicked out a flatmate of his because he couldn't stand the 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 kind of passive aggressive spiritualistic. Um, he didn't use the word passive aggressive violence. He used like it's just like this passive aggressive spiritualistic manipulation. Like, you know, I just think the energy would flow between us so much better if you just did everything I said. It'd be so much
exactly.
easier to live,
If you just
harmoniously
agree with me,
if you just agreed with me. I mean, just I can really feel there's a block between us.
exactly.
Yeah. And people and here's the thing is like that's actually you know, like what is violence in a very subtle form? Violence is forcing someone to change their opinion through by way of a threat, you know?
Yes.
And it's like what's the threat of this kind of syrupy niceness where I think I'm being sincere or like Katie says you may not hit them, but do you put the mug down a little too hard? You know, and that to me, that's a very subtle act of violence. It's like boom, it's not hitting them. It's like clank. And,
And the way I look at it is, how am I showing to this person that they're not okay and that I want them to change
hmm
and that their behavior is unacceptable to me?
hmm
And yeah, so niceness can be, and I'm not even talking the syrupy niceness, sincere niceness can still be a weapon.
hmm
I often joke when I give presentations, I always often say, beware if I'm nice to you. There might be something else going on.
How interesting. So let me ask you a question, Brian. The longer you do the work, what has been your relationship with the turnarounds, or what's been your understanding? How has your understanding of the turnarounds changed, or your
Oh.
process around them changed as you become more experienced with the work?
Well, what I've noticed, hmm, what I've noticed with the work is if I have a tough time, like sometimes the examples of turnarounds just come to me and it's like, oh, I've done this, they're easy. So that's usually a signal for me to slow down and really find not necessarily the easy answer, but what is more true or
Mm-hmm.
truer in that situation, in that given situation. So that's one thing I find. Another thing is if I find a turnaround that doesn't seem to work or that doesn't seem to be true at all, those are the ones that I tend to really sit with.
Like
Because
the
I
I hit
usually,
him, like an example of someone's really
well,
struggling.
that can be one,
Yeah.
yes. Like, how am I hitting him? Um, and I really get still and I don't just give a pat answer because I really want to know how am I doing it and all the ways that I'm doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't find an obvious answer, or if I think, no, that's not, I can't, there are no examples of that turnaround, that's when I usually get extra still and sit, how is this true? Because it's usually something that I'm not seeing. If I'm blocking an example of a turnaround, those are the ones I need to be even more attentive to.
Mm-hmm.
So I can really find what am I denying myself from seeing. Because the mind's a tricky thing, and I find it can gloss things over really easy, or like, oh, I know this, and so that's one way of glossing it over. Another way is just, no, I don't see anything. I looked and I can't find an example of those turnarounds.
Mm-hmm.
That's usually either one of those things happening is usually a, a signpost for me
Mm-hmm.
to get more still and more quiet and really inquire within.
So, can you also talk about in terms going back to just there's the advance is the wrong word. There's like going more experience with the turnarounds, but then going back to the very beginning. What about common mistakes of the mechanics, like the term double turnarounds, or like people just kind of
Oh,
spinning out, like the stressful thought he shouldn't hit me, and then I do the turnaround.
I should hit him.
I should hit him. Like
Yeah,
a turnaround is I shouldn't hit him, but a double
yeah,
turnaround is I should hit
should
him.
hit
And
him.
so like,
Yeah.
why is that? Why is that? As Byron Katie puts it, spinning as opposed to being productive. I guess productive and like moving forward.
Yeah, I find it's called spinning. That's one example of spinning. And it's when you spin when you do a double turnaround. So he shouldn't have hit me spins around into I should hit him. So I'm changing the should, and
hmm
I'm also switching the object and subject. Um, and the reason why I find that's not productive from my experience is, well, spinning is a good term for it. It makes my head spin. And it kind of it's the flip side of another turnaround.
Hmm.
So I'm not trying to question the turnarounds. I'm in questioning the original statement. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's
So if
that.
I'm
Yeah.
spinning, I end up questioning. So one of the quote unquote legitimate turnaround would be, um, I shouldn't hit him. Okay.
Hmm.
So if I'm spinning to I should hit him, I'm kind of negating a turnaround. And so spinning, instead of trying to question the original statement, I'm questioning now the turnaround.
Great.
Does
Okay.
that make
That
sense?
makes perfect sense. That
And
makes perfect sense.
so then that's why it's not very productive. Sometimes, and I'm not thinking of an example, but sometimes questioning a turnaround may be useful. But I always find that it's more useful for me to find examples of the turnarounds. And then if a turnaround is particularly stressful, to work it later, but to find the truth in it nonetheless.
Okay, so that's a key point. I'd like you to say more about that. Is that sometimes, in my experience, and also witnessing others do the work, is that some of these turnarounds are very stressful. You know,
Yeah.
like in traumatic situations, like I shouldn't hit him. You know, like I shouldn't be hitting him, and like. And at one point when I was doing this, I'm like, this is nuts. Like, he was the one hitting me, and I got very aggro about the turnaround. I got very
Yeah.
upset, and I've seen other people very upset. You know, like turnarounds, like someone lost an ungodly sum of money due to being swindled. You know,
Yeah.
and then the turnaround is I shouldn't swindle that person, and like the person, like you could see the sparks fly out of his ears.
Yeah.
You know, like trying to contemplate, how he swindled him.
Yeah.
And he got very upset. So how share if you could say more about that.
I find it, if a turnaround upsets me, that's just another way to, it's an invitation to get still and take it in, because there's something about the turnaround that I'm already attacking,
Hmm.
so, or don't want to look at. So that's why I say let the turnaround live for a while as the turnaround. Um, and then and find what it has to give me.
Hmm.
And if it still continues to be stressful, I always say wait a couple days and then question it. For instance, trying to find a good example of this. Uh, he he should be vulnerable. Turn around, I should be vulnerable. So if I'm vulnerable, that could be really stressful in certain tense emotional situations. I should be vulnerable. I don't want to be vulnerable. It's scary to be. So I, I always say, let that turnaround live. Like, how should you be vulnerable in this situation? And how are you not being vulnerable in that situation? So I look at that. And then if that's still stressful, a few days later, I should be vulnerable. Is it true? Obviously, I'm not. I'm defensive. I'm scared. And it's just seeing with what is. Um, because I should be vulnerable could feel like a mandate, like I got to be vulnerable now, and I'm not ready to do that, and that's scary to me.
Hmm.
And so that becomes stressful. So questioning it at a later time, like a few days later, I should be vulnerable. Is it true? Can be very helpful. But doing it at that same time and not allowing the turnaround, I should be vulnerable, to sink in. So spinning's a way to not allow the turnarounds to sink in.
Mm.
It's like you're denying a turnaround its right to live. Um, or it's right, I'm denying a right for me to really look at it. So how should I be vulnerable? And then if I notice I can't allow myself to be vulnerable, it's just not happening, it might be useful to question that, like, I should be vulnerable. Is it
Right.
true? I
Okay.
hope is a
That
good
that
example.
does. Yeah. It's like sometimes doing a turnaround can be very upsetting. Experiencing it, and the invitation is to sit with it and see if you can find the truth of that in the context of it being a turnaround. And then if there's still stress around it, you know, days, day or two, three, whatever later, then you could take that separate turnaround to inquiry as a separate belief to question because clearly it's stressful. And that in the sense that you end up doing turnarounds to that first turnaround, but you're not actually spinning because it's done as a completely separate thought that you brought to
Yeah.
inquiry.
Yeah.
Um, Now, the last thing I want to ask you about, perhaps this is another, this would be the subject of another topic all on its own, is living the turnarounds. And and the thing is, like, sometimes, like, I've had the thought where, like, oh, I've done the turn, oh, now I've got to live this way, like, and I've got to. It's like I made the turnarounds a concept that I had to act out. That the only way for me to do the work properly is to now, oh, I've found all these turnarounds, now I've got to, like, do examples of all of them in real life, or now I've got to go make amends to the person who hit me, and, like, God, that feels like crap, I don't want to do that. And, like, it gets like, I spin out on the trying to make amends, and I don't want to. So yeah, that's,
Yeah.
living
I
amends.
always find you don't, well, for me, I don't want the work to be another way to tyrannize me.
Mm-hmm.
And turnarounds, like for instance, turnarounds, they shouldn't be selfish, turnaround, I shouldn't be selfish. Well, am I ready to give away my belongings and dedicate my life to a full-time service? No, I'm not there. So I always remember Katie's statement of don't be more spiritual than you are,
Mm.
or don't be more mature than you are. Um, so the first person I'm always gentle with is me. I find the work always brings a more gentle view of others and the world around me. And I'm part of that world. So if I'm using a turnaround to attack me or to oppress me or to beat me up psychologically, then I don't think that's the work. I find the work, I use the turnarounds to awaken me and
Mm-hmm.
enlighten me. And living that turnarounds, I find sometimes I'm ready to move into living the turnaround, and sometimes I'm not. And sometimes I'm a little bit of both. And that's okay. It's like that's where I'm at. And to be honest with you, I find if I really do the work on something, I I find I do start living the turnaround automatically.
Mm.
Like if I'm working with someone I'm really stressed with and I find peace with them and I can't find a problem with them, I notice I'm kinder and gentler with them. And
Mm-hmm.
that's my living turnaround.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so a lot of times living the turnaround is not a conscious thing. You do the work and I find turnarounds are lived automatically to a large degree. And then sometimes I have to work on living the turnarounds. But to me, I'm always, because I've always had such a history of such harshness on myself. And the work really woke me up to how harsh I can be on myself. That I always start with gentleness with me. Because if I'm gentle with me, I'll be gentle with others, um, and vice versa. So I don't know if that's helpful.
It is. Your opening statement of the you don't make the work a new tyranny. Kind of a well-meaning spiritual tyrannical you know concept. Like,
Yes.
I shouldn't be selfish. I shouldn't be selfish. I shouldn't be, and it becomes this. You know, I think the Sanskrit
Because
word is vasana. Becomes this other. It becomes this additional, like, mental spinning. It's a different version
Yeah.
of spinning. Uh,
And I find, it's like I shouldn't be selfish, and yet I can find very good ways for me why I should be, and why it's better for other people that I am.
can you give an example of that for the people, just so people aren't like,
Well,
what?
it's like, can I be selfish? And I look at selfishness as, can I take care of myself?
Mm,
Can I say no when I mean no, and yes when I mean yes, and honest with people? Some people may see that as selfish, and I see that as being kind to me. um, when I'm selfish, people can trust that I'm taking care of myself, and doing what I need, what I feel I need to do. So that gives them a break.
mm.
Um, does that make sense? It's
Yes.
not like I'm out of their business. Because if I'm truly selfish, I'm in my business,
Hmm.
and that's a kind place to be, and I'm
Mm.
not meddling in theirs. So that's the upside of selfishness.
Interesting. That's really beautiful because you could take, you can take these supposed negative, states that we attribute to people, and then find, no different than you saying like how when you describe like if you're being really nice, really you're not being nice. And the same
Yeah,
reverse is also true, is that when you're being selfish, and if specific cases you're actually not being, so
yeah,
you can question the both the quote positive things and then the quote negative things, and ultimately it's about finding peace with both of them.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I find the work helps me find balance. And I can be selfish sometimes, I can be selfish other times. I can be generous, I can be stingy, and I can move in and out of that in a balanced way that works for me. And that doesn't mean I'm not growing. It's just, this is where I'm at.
Hmm.
And I notice I grow in whatever way I grow. I can't make myself be more mature than I am. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you, Brian. This was great. Nice kind of just kind of succinct discussion on the turnarounds, which I think definitely a subject worth coming back to,
Yeah.
and especially working examples, things like that. And yeah, so thank you very much, Brian. Again, this is Brian Wagner of the work with Bryan.com. Brian spelled B-W-B-R. That's W-B-U-R. The Brian spelled B-R-Y-A-N. The work with Bryan.com. And also is acupuncture clinic in St. Louis, www.acustl.com. And thanks, Brian. We'll talk again soon, okay?
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, Sam.
Bye.